Good morning. So today's video is going to be about the second trimester. So some common things to go over in the second trimester. One thing that I had some people ask about was when they would start to feel their baby move. So this is very dependent on what pregnancy it is for you, where your placenta attached to your uterus, and just kind of you and your baby in general. It's very different. So the earliest that I have felt any of my babies was 11 weeks, which I thought was very, very early because the baby is still so very small at 11 weeks. But I felt him every day from 11 weeks after, so I knew it was actually that, and it was my fifth pregnancy, so I'm guessing that probably played part in it too. Now, this time that I'm pregnant with my sixth, my placenta is right in the front, so in the front of my belly. And from my experience, I've had this 2 times now that the placenta is in the front, and I find it shields a lot of the movement. So you start to feel movement a lot a lot later in the pregnancy, but you might also feel less movement because the placenta is kind of cushioning the movement from hitting your belly. So I find with this pregnancy now, because my placenta is in the front, I only started to really feel movement at 18 weeks. So to me, that felt really late after feeling my fifth baby at 11 weeks already. So it felt really late to me, but everything was really good. Baby was measuring fine. At the midwife appointments, they would listen for the heartbeat, and the heartbeat was completely fine. So there was no reason to worry. And now that after I did start feeling movement at 18 weeks, I'm feeling regular movement every day, and I am 22 weeks along now. So everything's fine. It just takes longer with some babies than it does with others. So don't worry if you're further along than you think you should and you haven't felt anything yet. It's coming. And then with where the placenta placement is, so there's nothing you can do to get the placenta in a certain spot because it completely just depends on wherever the fertilized egg attaches onto your uterus. That's where your placenta will grow. So if it happens to attach in the front of your uterus, then it will grow there and your placenta will be in the front. If it happens to attach in the back, then that's where it grows. But also another thing to keep in mind is that your uterus starts off really, really small. So I think it's about the size of your fist when you're not pregnant. And then, well, how big does it get by the time you have your baby, right? It fits a whole 9-pound baby in there. So your uterus starts off really, really small. And then the fertilized egg attaches somewhere on the inside of your uterus. So say it attaches here. As it grows, your uterus is growing and growing and growing, it shifts. See how because your uterus stretches so much, your placenta could be in a completely different spot by the end of your pregnancy than it is in the beginning. So there's a lot of women that have even had what's called placenta previa, which is where your placenta is going right over your cervix. And for a lot of women, it shifts as you get bigger, your uterus stretches more, and the placenta will actually move out of the way, and then it's not over your cervix anymore, and it's not a concern. Now, if your placenta is over your cervix and you're full term, then a vaginal delivery is not an option because, well, the baby needs to come out before the placenta, right? And if the placenta is completely covering your cervix, there's nowhere for the baby to go unless the placenta lets go first, which is dangerous, right? You start bleeding and stuff. So in that case, then a C-section is the only option. But if you have placenta previa in the beginning of your pregnancy, don't panic because there's a very, very high chance that it'll be completely out of the way by the time you're full term and you need to deliver your baby. So not something to worry about until you're right at the end. I personally know of a few women who had their placenta over their cervix in the beginning of the pregnancy, and it moved by the time they were in the third trimester, so they didn't have any problems with that. So just something to keep in mind. And then another thing they do in the second trimester, usually about 28 weeks or so. I'm not sure how it is for Mexico, but I know for the US and Canada, they do a glucose test at 28 weeks to check where your sugar levels are to see if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic during pregnancy, which gestational diabetes. And it is quite common, but from my research, a lot of it, a very, very big part of it, comes from your diet. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the test itself. So here in Canada, they have a little bottle of, it tastes like flat soda that you're drinking. It's very, very sweet, very sugary drink that they have you drink. And then you sit and wait for 1 hour, and then they do a blood draw and they test your blood to see where how your body is handling that amount of sugar. Now, this video is not to tell you what to do, to tell you not to do something, or to tell you what you should do. It is to tell you that you have options. Choose for yourself what is best for you, but know that it is your choice. Whatever you decide is best for you, that should be because you feel that is what is best, not because that's what the doctors are telling you to do. Doctors do not always have your best interest in mind. A lot of times they have the interest of the laws that they're given, the rules that they're given, but those rules are often not for our best interest. So you need to make decisions that are for your best interest, whether that's what the doctor says or not. So for me personally, with my first two babies, I did not know very much about the glucose test that they do, and I figured, well, why not, right? You want to know if you have gestational diabetes so you know what to do about it, so why not check for it? And there is history of diabetes in my family already anyway, so I think because of that, they wanted me to be checked for it even more. Now, after my second, I did more research about it, and I realized just how bad the drink is that they have you drink. The ingredients that are in there are not something I would ever just drink on its own. So why are we drinking something like that during a time when we're pregnant? That's exposing our baby to a lot of things that we normally wouldn't ever. So it doesn't make sense to do that during pregnancy either. Some care providers will accept to do, like for you to drink grape juice instead, which is it's still very sugary, but it doesn't have all the other extra stuff in there that the glucose drink does. So maybe bring that up if you choose to do that instead. For me personally, so I did it with my first two because I didn't know better. And I felt extremely sick after drinking them. Like I thought I was going to pass out. I felt like I was going to throw up. I felt really, really sick for the rest of that day. I could feel that it was not good for my body. So with my third, I knew I didn't want to drink that again. I had a better idea now of what's in that drink and that I didn't want to put that into my body. And so when I was expecting with my third, I brought it up to my midwife that I didn't want to do that again. I asked her about doing an alternative to the drink instead, maybe grape juice. Some people do like organic jelly beans. You would eat a certain amount of organic jelly beans in a certain amount of time. And there is also a natural glucose drink that you can order and drink that instead. Some care providers will take that. I'm going to see if I can find a link to that natural drink. I actually just found out about it recently, and I'll share that with you guys. But yeah, so I was going to talk to my care provider and see if she was, if she would be against having me do one of those instead. And she actually said that their office does not take any kind of alternative to the glucose test, but what I found out is that you have the right to say no. You can say no to everything. Everything that goes on with your body and your baby, you have the right to say no. It is completely up to you what you do and what you don't do, and it is their job to respect that. Not all of them will be equally respectful, some of them will fight against it more, but you do have the right to say no. So I told her that if they were not going to take an alternative test, like grape juice or something, then I did not want to do the glucose test. I did not have gestational diabetes with my first two pregnancies. I had no signs of having gestational diabetes. I did not feel like I was at risk for it. So I told her that I was choosing to decline the gestational diabetes test for now, the glucose test. And if later in my pregnancy, towards the end, if there was signs that I was diabetic, then we would talk about other options then. But for now, because I was not showing any symptoms of being diabetic, I didn't want to do the glucose test. And she said, okay. So just be aware that you do have options and you do have the right to say no. But again, like I said, decide for yourself what is right for you and your baby, right? So one more thing that I wanted to talk about is yeast infections. So I had someone ask about yeast infections in pregnancy, what to do to prevent them and how to treat them. So for prevention, a big thing is sugar. So your body takes sugar and yeast and turns it into a yeast infection in your body. So our bodies naturally have some yeast so that our bodies can decay after we die, right? Our bodies wouldn't decay if we didn't have yeast. So we have to have some yeast. That's how we're made. But when we're constantly feeding it more and more sugar, what happens to yeast when you feed it sugar? It grows, right? So the more sugar we're eating, the more we're growing that yeast, and it does not need to be so much. We only need a little bit. So ease off on sugar and wheat as well. Wheat turns into starch when you're eating it. Things like noodles, bread, stuff like that. If sourdough is an option for you, that's really, really good. It's fermented, so it's much better for you. It does not have all the sugar in it because the fermentation process eats it up. There's also things like kefir, organic apple cider vinegar, kombucha, any of those kinds of things that are fermented is very good for your body, and it will help to balance out the yeast a little bit more as well. Taking a good quality probiotic is huge. That makes the biggest difference for your body in yeast and things like that. It helps to get rid of all of that. So just a few things to keep in mind. And then I did also have someone mention that she takes a teaspoon of coconut oil every day during pregnancy to avoid yeast infections. So that I had not heard of before, but I thought it was interesting and I would mention it. So those are some things that you can do to kind of prevent it and get rid of it if you have it. But I think with pregnancy especially, prevention is huge. Almost everyone ends up with yeast infections unless you're fighting against it. So if you're pregnant, even if you're not, try to be mindful of what you're eating, how much sugar, things like that, and to keep your gut in good working order so that you don't need to end up dealing with yeast infections, because that is something that your body passes on to your baby. So if you have a yeast infection when you have your baby, or even while you're breastfeeding, your baby ends up with that. And that's where the white coating on the baby's tongue when they're nursing, actually even when they're not nursing, a bottle-fed baby can also have that. And cradle cap, if they have cradle cap on their head, that is also a sign of yeast. So those are things that you can see your baby has yeast, and you can give your baby the probiotics as well. For us, it made a huge difference giving those to my baby when I had the yeast infection. But yes, prevention is key, so work on that if you can.